Well, welcome to the journey. My name is Kevin Polky, and I am the host of the journey. And today we have a special guest returning to us, Brian Montalbano, and he was one of our guests with his own unique story of how his life has gone and what he's now done with his life. Brian was on the show back in the beginning of the pandemic, back in 2020. And since then, his story, his journey has taken a couple twists and turns, and I know we're going to get into that in a moment. But Brian, welcome back to the journey.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me again. Looking forward to chatting. It's been a few years, so it'll be good to catch up.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, one of the things that I know have happened, you moved from Chicago down to Tennessee, where you're at, and as we were just talking a moment ago, weather is relative, and it sounds like it's pretty cold down there comparatively to what you guys are used to. And I know that they're sometimes not always well prepared for for what we may in Wisconsin and Illinois be prepared for.
Yeah, it was interesting. I got up early and shoveled the driveway just to kind of get ahead of it, and kind of uniquely missed that quiet that I used to have when I lived in Chicago. It was the only quiet time I had between 5 and 6 a.m. shoveling the drive. But yeah, we're not equipped down here for the snowstorms or the cold weather, so it'll be an interesting couple of days.
Sure. So, well, Brian, why don't you, just for the ones and for our listeners now, to just kind of bring us up to speed of uh, who you are, what you know who you are, where you came from, some of the family dynamics growing up, just kind of color a little bit, and then we'll jump into your backstory, and then where you've been at the last couple of years.
Yeah, sure thing. So I grew up in Northern Illinois. I grew up in Rockford. I came from a class family, mom, dad, and younger brother. Um, yeah, I went to high school, kind of progressed in my career. I work in supply chain and logistics now. So I've been able to kind of go to college, advance my career. Early on, at the age of 9, I had a bout of something called cardiomyopathy, which is an enlargement of the heart muscle, and that led to heart transplant number one. And that transplant lasted 20 years. And then in 2011, I needed a second transplant. So at 29, I ended up having second heart transplant. Had some few complications after that, where it was a little rocky for a few months. But then back at it, met my wife, and now we have two kids and two dogs, and kind of living the dream right now. So things have been going relatively stable since the surgery. So
Sure. So, Brian, your wife's first name is
yeah, my was Heather.
Heather. Okay. And Heather had you and Heather been together for how long? How old were you when you and Heather met?
I was either 29 or 30. So we've been together for about 12, 13 years and been
Okay.
married. Will be 10 years this year. So
Okay. And you have two children, right?
two kids. We have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. So
Okay. Nice. All right. That's they will definitely keep you moving, especially at those ages.
yeah,
They're moving.
they are. They're busy all the time. They're up. Our youngest is usually up before all of us at like 5:45, 5:30 in the morning, ready to roll. And yeah, they keep us on our toes all day. It's good though. It kind of keeps us young, and
Sure.
it's great to have them around. So
Nice. Okay. So with that, when you were talking about uh you were 9 years old and your life had a twist to it that most 9-year-olds and most families of 9-year-olds don't experience. And that was uh uh having this major surgery of having a heart transplant. What from looking back on that, what do you remember about that experience? How did it play out for your family? How did it play out for you? And I know you're 9, so it's hard for us to see anything except through a 9-year-old's
yeah,
eyes. So
yeah. I think the biggest thing now, especially having kids, and our oldest isn't quite that age yet, but I think I was naive to the fact of what was going on. I knew I was sick. I knew how sick I was because I was gravely ill. Um, but it also kind of made me have to grow up really fast. And I think I've done a lot of charity work through Make-A-Wish Foundation and other things, and you see unfortunately, a lot of chronic and sick children and families dealing with it. But I think the one thing that it does for the patient, regardless of the age, but especially when you're younger, become an adult like immediately. You know, I you're getting tasked with serious questions. You might not understand it. For me, I was able to come on the other side and, fortunate enough to get the life-saving transplant. But coming with that, you have to take medicine, at least twice a day, multiple times a day. You're managing your pill schedule. You got to stay on those medications for the rest of your life. So there's a lot of like maturity that has to happen at a young age. And, it puts stress on your family because they got to worry about you now. Are you going to get sick because you're immunocompromised? What do you do? Do you go back to school? Can you live a quote unquote normal life? Because my first transplant was in 1990. There wasn't a lot of research on it. I was the 219th heart transplant at Loyola in Chicago. So even at that time, that was a small number of all of Chicago in that hospital. So and advancements have come, myriads and myriads, ahead from where we were, 30 some odd years ago. And I actually just had my 13-year anniversary of my second transplant. I think it was a couple days ago. So and I haven't had a single issue with the second heart, but it's just, I've had, my life's been very blessed. But there is a lot of maturity that comes with that, and a lot of decision makings that a lot of people just don't see and don't realize that, you know, you have to kind of grow up because you're dealing with life and death kind of from there until the rest of your life.
So with that, obviously it wasn't just at 9 years old having the heart transplant and that surgery. It was about your life being impacted by being sick
Yeah,
prior to that, right? And
yeah.
so when do you, from the best you recall, when did you start having symptoms that were really impacting you from being able to maybe do the same things that other kids were doing your age?
Yeah, it happened really fast, and I actually remember it very vividly. I played a lot of sports growing up, and it was around May or June of that year. I hit a ball into left field and ran down to first base and didn't make it to the base. And the coach kind of told me, I was yelling like I was running like an old lady and couldn't make it to the base, and just kind of really getting into me, even being a young age, for not making it there. And I kind of came home and told my parents. I was like, I was having a really hard time catching my breath, and told my parents my heart was beating fast one day and just couldn't really understand why. And that was in June of that year. And then my transplant happened in October. So I progressed
Wow.
rapidly from being a kid who never really got sick. I'm not really prone to colds. I don't really never had the flu, never had strep, even to this day. Rarely got sick as a kid, but that hit me hard. And then in a span of, 3 to 4 or 5 months, I wouldn't have got the transplant on the day I got it. I don't think I would have been there the next day to live because I was so chronically ill from that period. So it happened in a short window, but it progressed extremely fast from the chronic illness standpoint.
Gotcha. Okay. And so with that, as you started again thinking back to that first, because the reason why I'm asking about that is because I know, uh, having been a counselor for all these years, right? Knowing, looking back on my own life, when what we do, when we look at regarding therapy or, coaching or whatever we're doing, I those things that happen during those impressionable years, have sometimes an impact on us where we make conclusions about how life is or how life
Mm-hmm.
could be or supposed to be. I mean, joke about, not joke, but point out that if someone grew up as being really thin, skinny, and could eat anything and do anything, through grade school, middle school, even high school, in their mind, they're always skinny, so they're going to be the person at the beach. They doesn't matter whatever they weigh, in their mind they still believe, oh yeah, maybe I put on a couple pounds. The other way around happens is that if someone always grew up and perceived that they were overweight, no matter how lean they get, no matter how much
Mm-hmm.
body fat they lose as an adult, their impression is that they are always that kid that was overweight, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not that weight determines value or anything like that. My point of saying this is more about an impression that we take, and then we kind of lock it into our psyche, and then we find things to confirm that along our journey, right? and
Mm-hmm.
and so when you know, for you in that short window of time of,
Hmm.
June of your ninth grade year, and of course, I mean, that coach probably was some dad who was just helping out with little league,
Hmm.
a little bit
Yeah,
about
yeah,
baseball maybe,
yeah,
didn't realize that his motivational technique of shaming you
yeah.
into running faster may not necessarily work in this particular case, especially because you had something that had nothing to do with motivation.
Hmm.
But again, these are all things that we could, some people there it just bounces off them, just slides
Hmm.
right off them, right? Others,
Yeah.
it's just like and sticks with us. When you think back of that now as a 40-year-old looking back on that 9-year-old boy, what do you know today that he may not have known?
I think that's a good question. I think the biggest thing that I've learned out the course of my life dealing with everything that I've dealt with is a couple things. One, tomorrow's not promised to anybody, so try to live your life, the best that you can each day. And then two, it really doesn't matter what anybody else says, thinks, or feels. You got to do kind of what's best for you. And that comment, I don't know why it sticks with me. I mean, that was so long ago. Um, but it kind of sticks with me, and it kind of sticks to me as like the point of my health journey, because that was the first time I felt like, wow, I couldn't really do something. And I think that's maybe why the comment stands out. And then I remember talking to my parents about it. Then I remember kind of going through some of the ins and out prior to the surgery. But that comment really stuck with me. But at the end of the day, it's the actions that I think you as an individual take to kind of get you through that. And that's been kind of my mentality. I've faced challenges. I've been told multiple times I'm not going to make it. I've been told I'm not going to be able to go back to work. I've been told, you got 3 to 6 months to live. And yet, I'm 40, I think I'm 42 now. Um, and I'm still here kind of forging through each day. And I think my parents did a really good job early on, after I got home, after my surgery, kind of let me be a kid and kind of let me do the things that I needed to do to kind of still play and grow up. And I've kind of taken that mentality into everything I've gone to. I take my transplant as a gift, and I want to honor my donors' families by living my life, not retreating and staying inside and being overly cautious. Everybody's got to be cautious. I wash my hands probably more than anybody in the world, um, uh, but you still want to honor. I think the best way you can honor the donor family is by living your life to the fullest, just like they would want their loved ones to have done. And that's what I've tried to do. I've tried to take that comment and those what I took out of the yeah, I couldn't do something now, but now that I can, I want to maximize kind of my output. And that's what I strive to do every day, whether it be in a family man, whether it be in through work. I try to give 110% each day. And I try to just live my life how I want to live it and let all the outside noise be there, and, just be confident in my abilities and move forward.
Well, I think, I think a couple great points, right? Is that I think when we come to a place and we reconcile, yes, there's going to be a bookmark that happens, right? It's
Yeah.
bookmarked there because of that moment in time that is bookmarked with that comment that then allowed you to have it stand out enough to share with your parents, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so yes, it was the beginning of that part of the journey, but it was critical, and that led to you getting the transplant, letting you then for 20 years, being able to utilize that donor's heart and have life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that is that again, that's that idea that we reconcile ourselves to things so we don't have to carry that energy of negativity or fear or whatever it is, saying that yes, something that could be perceived as negative also can be utilized for life-giving. And so
Yes.
so you're 20, you're in your late 20s. Obviously, something starts to show that things aren't going well. right?
hmm
So
hmm
tell us a little bit about that story, because someone who doesn't know a ton other than from yourself and our times when we've met, and
hmm
maybe our audience doesn't know a lot about, someone who has a transplant at such a young age.
hmm
Is this a common thing that someone 20 years later would have to have another transplant?
Yeah, I think like the statistics out there is like you got to keep the 5 year mark. So if you get past 5 years, you're usually pretty good for a while. I think the longevity really depends on various things: the age of the donor, the age of the recipient, the match, your antibody level, how many times you have or go through rejection, so your body attacking your heart. What happened with me in the first one, my first transplant was, 5 years after transplant, I had 5 year range. I had very severe rejection. So was in the hospital, almost didn't make it, went through something called plasmapheresis, which wasn't as common back in like 95, but it kind of circulated out my antibodies, kind of got them back in, and I kind of reversed the transplant. I was told that day I would need another transplant. And then 3 days later, after they did the plasmapheresis, I was back, I was back at school that next year. And the heart lasted another 15 years. But in between there, the rejection started to cause blockages. And then the blockages led to, I had a heart attack. And then the heart attack led to stents and then angioplasty and stuff like that. And I did that for, 5 years, from year 15 to year 20, trying to prolong that heart, because transplant surgery is difficult to go through. You don't really want to have a major surgery if you don't have to. So I wanted to prolong that heart as long as I could. So my mid 20s until I was 29, I was able to do that. And then, I think it was around October of 20, 2010 was kind of the last time that they're like, hey, you're blocked. All your arteries are blocked. We can't really do anything else. You're going to need to do another transplant. And I was able to get a hold of University of Chicago, and Dr. Jivanandam's a world-renowned transplant surgeon, and he's the one who actually ended up doing my second transplant. Got a hold of him. He called me the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, flew up with my and talked with him with my parents, and got it done in January of that following year. So my second transplant, and it's unfortunate that I had that rejection. It's the only rejection I've had with any transplant whatsoever. It just happened to be a major one. But I think, I've also learned from that, because it's like it can happen. I don't worry that it does happen, but I know that it can happen. And then, I think going through kind of the life or death issues that I had, having the heart attack, dealing with blockage. I'm like, I would go in for angiograms and get stents put in on a Thursday, fly back to Atlanta, and go to work on a Monday. It was just kind of like normal. I didn't really let it kind of deter me. So I just kind of had the mentality, this was my life. I got to kind of power through. Work was kind of a safety net for me, because it gave me something to focus on. So I threw myself into work. I hadn't met my now wife at the time, so it's all I really had was to just kind of throw myself into my work. And that, I think that kind of gave me an outlet to focus my attention on. But I've never been one to really worry about my mortality or anything like that. I just don't. I never focus on my health. I just, if something pops up, deal with it, and then move on to the next day, and keep going forward. And I think that's something that helps me personally, that I don't have a lot of health anxiety, or I don't have any health anxiety. And it kind of helps me kind of navigate through life, because everything's chaotic in my health with my health. But actually, I'm relatively healthy now. Still bumps that you deal with, but I think if I focus on that every day, it would probably overconsume my life. And I try to focus on the things that are around me: my wife, my kids, my job, etc. So
Sure, gotcha. Well, and that aspect too, right? That for people, for the audience to just know that that window of time, that 5 years, and then the in your particular case, the complications that you had with your body and that particular heart. Sounds like it hasn't been the story with the second heart, and so it doesn't always happen. It can happen,
mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm,
again, you said this earlier about, we can't always, we have limited amount of control over the things that happen to us, right? I mean,
mm-hmm,
granted, if there's ice out on the road, right, and you're still thinking you should drive at the same speed that you do when there's not ice on the road, you have some influence over that control, right? But
mm-hmm,
we don't have influence if there's going to be ice on the road. We don't have influence of the temperature. We just have influence about what are we going to do to prepare ourselves for that. And I think that's metaphorical for just life as a whole. And I think you're making a great example, or a great example of that, is that, you know, you could very much have anxiety and be stressed about when's the next time, you're going to get news, or, any little, was I having a hard time breathing there? Or, I mean,
Hmm.
there's a lot of times individuals will have that response to it. Um, and I think, when you talked about this idea that prior to Heather and the kids, work served to give you meaning and
Hmm.
purpose in life. And 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 that, I think, has has a huge impact on our lives. If we only focus on, you know, am I going to have a good day or a bad day, or so focused on how I'm being impacted by something, or trying to avoid being impacted on something, that's a pretty that's going to be a pretty anxious life.
Hmm.
That's going to be a pretty difficult time. But if we attach ourselves to something bigger than ourselves,
Hmm.
maybe it's a project or a work, obviously another person, or in your case, family, right? These are things that add to when you don't feel like pushing through. They were like, all right, I got to push through for this. So,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I get it. So then in 2020, we were talking earlier about this. Then in 2020,
Hmm.
um, sometime in 2020, then there was another thing that started happening, and that, you had your first bout with cancer. So let's
Hmm.
tell us a little bit about that experience and what has gone on in the last few years.
Yeah, so I think it was June of 2020. I was outside doing some yard work, and like I had mentioned before, I don't really catch colds. I don't really get upper respiratory stuff, and I felt a little wheeze kind of in the back of my right lung. And I was just like, it was during COVID and everything was going on. It was kind of nobody knew what COVID really was at that point, and I was just like, I went inside, I took a shower. I'm like, well, maybe I can cough it out, just trying to see if I had some gunk, and it didn't go away. And I was just like, it just felt weird. It was different. So I was just like, I'm pretty in tune to my body. So if something's different, I usually get it checked out immediately. So I was just like, you know what? I'm just gonna go to the ER. I'll just go get checked out. Went to the ER. They listened to me. They heard the wheeze. They ended up doing an X-ray, and they found like a 2 to 3 centimeter mass on my right lower lobe. And the doctor came in and they're like, well, we think this is probably an infection or some type of fungus. I would give it like 6 months and then get it checked out again. And I was like, I went back home and kind of talked to my wife, and I was like, I don't really feel like waiting 6 months to see what's going on. So I called them back and pushed for a biopsy and got in the next week. And they're like, we'll call you in like 4 days with the results. Well, 2 days later they called me, and when the doctor's calling early, it's not usually good news. And they called me and they're like, hey, yeah, it came back as cancerous. It actually ended up being synovial sarcoma, which is a very rare soft tissue cancer. So that was my first bout of it. So I went in, had surgery, removed the lower lobe of my lung, took the whole lobe out. Was cancer free for about 8 months. And then I noticed a bump on my scalp, which is an odd place for it to be, but I was like, this is odd. Went to the dermatologist, got it checked out. They sent it to like 3 different hospitals because they couldn't figure out what it was. Came back as synovial sarcoma again on the scalp, which is extremely rare. Usually starts somewhere and goes to the lung. So the lung wasn't too rare of a spot, but then for it to pop up on the scalp was extremely rare. So went in, had surgery. About 4 months later, had something pop up on my left tonsil, and I was just like, I felt it when I was swallowing. It was kind of white in the back. Couldn't figure out what it was. Went to my ENT, and they're like, okay, because your history is probably nothing. I love hearing it's probably nothing. I've heard that a lot. It's probably nothing, so we'll do a biopsy of it. And lo and behold, it was another round of sarcoma. So they did a tonsillectomy and took that tonsil out. And when they got that tonsil out, they had enough of the tumor that they were able to kind of dissect it and kind of determine, kind of the root cause of the cancer, which ended up being, from the immunosuppressant drugs that I had been on since I was 9 to this time, causing that cancer to form in my body. And, I think synovial sarcoma, I don't want to misquote the statistics, but it accounts for like less than 1% of all the soft tissue cancers in the world. So then, I went a handful of months. I think 3 months later, I went in for my normal PET scan, and then it was kind of all over. It was just, you never want it to light up like a Christmas tree when you go in for a PET scan. That's what it did. It was in my abdomen, it was in my chest, it was kind of everywhere. So we were still living in Chicago at the time. We're actually in the process of moving back to Tennessee. So, the regimen was to start chemotherapy. So went in and did a round I ended up doing 5 total rounds, I think, of chemo. And then, as of October of this past year, I'm a year cancer free again. So I've had, synovial sarcoma 4 times, 3 times being stage 4, which has a 5-year survival rate of like 15%. And yet, God willing, I'm still here and I'll continue to be here a long time. My oncologist down here is very optimistic that I'll continue to be healthy, and haven't had any reoccurrences in the last year after the chemo, which is good. But it's interesting that the medicine that I've been taking my whole life to help keep me alive because of the transplant is a contributing factor to this cancer that I got, and can't stop the medicine because I needed to protect my heart. So we got to do everything we can, which is just monitoring to make sure the cancer doesn't come back. So it's been a kind of crazy 3 or 4 years, especially with my wife and kids. And we were pregnant with our youngest during my first surgery. So it's just like kind of a whirlwind over the last 3 years. Kind of always thought I was going to be a transplant patient, and now I identify actually more as a cancer patient than I do a transplant recipient.
Gotcha. I know we earlier, in this conversation, we talked about, the the paradox, right? Of being able to take somebody's comment, right, that may have been could have either been out of his frustration, or could have been, out of his attempt to be motivational, or whatever it was, to a 9-year-old kid playing baseball, that ended up, hurtful as it was, it led to what then later was life-saving.
Mhm.
Um, and it's bookmarked at that. And so there's this paradox with that. And then now, this paradox of the same medications that are essential for the transplant to continue to be functional, continue to be working for you, is then the thing that's causing something that could kill you, the cancer.
Mhm.
And at least that's what I'm assuming. This is a cancer
Yep.
that could definitely take your life.
Yep.
And um, so yeah, tell me a little bit about, and obviously it took a while, right? I mean, now your doctors are aware that that you're living in this paradox, and not just you, other individuals who are on the same medication have, I would assume, the same tendency, the same, potential of this. Yeah, kind of tell us a little bit about that mentally, how to get your head wrapped around that.
Yeah, I think I mentioned I had just had my 13-year anniversary for my second transplant, and everything went well. From a cardiovascular standpoint, I'm as healthy as the day I was transplanted. So it's really good news. But in meeting with my main transplant cardiologist, she actually mentioned that, a lot of transplant patients now are succumbing to cancer instead of other things like heart disease and old age. And it's just, they don't really have, as a community right now, real answers, because they did adjust some of the medicine. So I was on 2 medicines to lower my immune system. They took me off one. They lowered my dose to the dose that they could lower it for me. So I'm on like a very low regimen of immunosuppressive medication, which is, it's a little can be a little nerve-wracking when you go off medicines, because I didn't want to turn into a heart patient again, because you kind of passed that and you're still trying to tackle the cancer piece. Um, but I think the important thing for me is that I'm very fortunate to still be here, and I wouldn't be here because of my transplant. And that's the main thing that I focus on. The cancer sucks and it's horrible, and I don't wish it on anybody. And and I hope that someday there's a cure for it, and I hope someday they come up with different medications for transplants as well that maybe don't be that aren't as prone to, you know, providing fuel for cancer. But I think I think it's all about how you kind of come to the table and approach it too. I've been very fortunate. Surgery for the first three. Surgery sucks, but I was able to kind of get it. It wasn't everywhere. The chemo worked for me. I got the news I got out of Chicago was, you got months, not years. Moved back down to Nashville. My oncologist was like, I expect you to live a very long time. So, not saying each doctor is right or wrong, but good focused medication to treat the cancer, adjustments in the transplant meds, more education around what can we do, I think is needed for everybody, because you don't want anybody to be taking something that's gonna prolong their life and then eventually you know cause something that could end it too, because cancer is a different animal. I mean, it's going to sound weird, but I can deal with cardiovascular stuff all day long. I've been living with it for so long, but the cancer is it's brutal. And anybody that's gone through it, you don't realize how strong those people are until they're on the other side of it, because it's a grueling, devastating disease for not only yourself, but the people around you that see you kind of dealing with it. So I feel like I'm fortunate that I'm on the other side. Hopefully I stay that way. Remission's not guaranteed, but I'm going to ride this train as long as I can. So I think it's important that continue to take your meds because you need to take them, and then continue to have conversations and education and what can the transplant community as a whole do help prolong recipients' lives with either adjustments to medication or updates to medication. I think that's the big piece, that the next step that the transplant community needs to take.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that element, right, of of being grateful for what you have been given and continue to be given, and then at the same time be aware and continue to have the conversations. We know that there's new developments all the time, and their new medicines are getting developed all the time. And I imagine in this particular case, there's probably a vested interest in developing medicines that are not causing other problems, because it seems to be probably something that pharmaceutical companies don't want to do. So I imagine there's a vested interest in that, and the scientists to come up and figure something else out. But I appreciate, and I'm glad you're able to share with the listeners about the mindset, right? The your own mental health and your mindset about these circumstances, because at the end of the day, that is something that we can influence and control. And is if there was something that you would want someone, either a family member or just an individual in general, that they're going through, maybe not something like or being a recipient of needing a transplant, or being a recipient of a transplant, or being a donor, or even cancer, but just more, just life. What would be something that you'd want to share, that from your own experience?
I think the biggest thing is you don't realize how important your support group is until you really need it. I'm very matter of fact when it comes to my health. Got the news, you just deal with it. Kind of just go through it and deal with it. I've kind of always been that way. But when you're really, really sick, you need support. And to kind of find that early in your journey and identify the people that can be there for you. Because whether it be transplants or cancer or anything, everybody needs somebody at some point. You can't do everything on your own, and that support system is an extension of your strength, and it really helps you. Those people help you get through it, even when they don't feel like that they're helping. They are, and I think that's the important thing. Surround yourself with the people that are going to have positive influence in your outcome, because that'll help you continue to kind of want to move forward and push forward. And not everybody ends up in situations that are positive. Sometimes it's just negative, and that's how it goes. But if you have a support system around you, it takes a little of that burden off of you to have to worry about and deal with everything, and that can help you heal and stay healthy and focus on your health and try to get better. And I think that's everybody needs that space, because if you're trying to deal with everything plus your health, it's almost gonna be too much taxation on your body. Everybody needs a little bit of an avenue to kind of let go and let other people kind of carry the burden for you for a little bit, and so you can kind of recover and move on. So I found that that's really important, especially having, wife and kid now as kids as well. So
Yeah. Well, Brian, I appreciate that, and I think sometimes we don't when we have these conversations, sometimes we don't necessarily always give credit to the individuals that are on our team that do all the behind the scenes support because
mhm.
you have a you just you were talking about something that reminded me of a story that I tell a lot about Admiral Stockdale, and he was referenced with his experience in Vietnam. He was a prisoner of war, prisoner in Vietnam, and Jim Collins, who has written many books, Good to Great, and a handful of other books, talked about when he interviewed Stockdale, they came up with this idea called the Stockdale paradox. And the short version of the Stockdale paradox is it's two components. One is he believed wholeheartedly that he was going to be released at some point in the future, and he was going to survive the camp and go back home. At the same time, he had that unwavering faith that he was going to be okay. Didn't know what okay was going to look like, but he believed he was going to be okay. At the same time, he had to deal with the brutal facts that he was in the camp right now, being tortured, being starved, whatever it might have been.
Mhm.
It reminds me of kind of how you've done life, that I'm gonna be okay. I'm gonna get on the other side of the either the transplant or the heart procedure or the cancer, but I gotta take care of it. I gotta go
Mhm.
to my appointment. I gotta take it on, head on. And then because you have that mindset, and you probably have told your team that's the mindset that you have, that
Mhm.
on those days when you've been down, they've reminded you, yep, this sucks, but you're going to get through this.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I think I need that mindset for myself. Like I don't feel like I could operate um with my health history if I didn't kind of think like that. I always think I'm going to beat it. I always think that I'm going to get through it, but I also know that I might not. But I'm also not afraid of that either. And so I've kind of been at peace with the fact that, you know, um, that there is a point that I might not be here, but I'm also never not really focused on it. I just know that it's there. But I also believe that anything that comes my way, I'm going to beat it because so far, fortunately, I have. So until I come up to something that I can't, defeat or overcome, I'm going to continue to have that mentality. And, I think that kind of helps me just kind of get through the day. Just get it, tackle it, move on.
sure. Yeah.
Got something else on the schedule for later in the day. You got to keep going. So,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, Brian, I, appreciate you being so open about sharing your journey. And then obviously, since the last time we talked, this has been a different part of your journey. And I'm grateful to hear that it's been over a year since you've had any issues with cancer, and hopefully working with your medical team that you'll be able to keep that at bay and help have your body healthy, fight off those cells that are undesirable, unwanted. And so, as we wrap up, is there anything that any last things that you want to share with the audience?
no, I just appreciate, dialogue around this topic. I think is extremely important. Not only organ donation and transplants, but I think the advancement that's needed for medicine for the transplant patients. But I think also just because you're given something by the doctor. I'm not saying all doctors are right or wrong, but just because you're given an outcome doesn't mean that it is definite. There's certain circumstances where you're going to be able to overcome it, certain circumstances where you're not. But I think, from what's helped me get through everything is just trying to push forward and just trying to get through the day. And it's like I mentioned earlier, you're only as strong as the support system you have around you. So try, if you're able, to kind of build that up so they can build you up in the times that you're not as strong as you need to be.
Perfect. Well, Brian, again, I appreciate you being with us, and look forward to another conversation here in the near future. And then when you're more a couple years cancer free and cardiovascular healthy, we'll have you back on and share more about your story, because those kids will be having you run, so you got to be in shape to keep up with them.
Yeah, you got to keep up with them now too. So
Exactly. So, um, just as Brian shared, and obviously some of the things that Brian shared about his own health history and experience may appear to be extreme, and part of the reason why I wanted Brian to come on is to share about the paradox of that sometimes we find ourselves in a situation where the thing that is essential for our health or our well-being may also then in itself lead to other aspects of problems, and then that how do we live within that paradox. And so as you contemplate about Brian's story and the things that he shared, um, definitely take into account the importance of sharing those feelings and sharing your attitude about being able to overcome those things and being able to prevail, but also the essential importance of having something, a purpose and a meaning that you'll put your energy toward, as well as developing a team around you that has your back and will have your support. As always, I appreciate you being here and look forward to being with you next week.